And back in Singapore, there have been more speech translator apps and AI-powered technology. But has this made translators redundant? To tell us more, we have guests from the National Translation Committee, that's the NTC, who work with government messages in Singapore's official languages. The NTC celebrated its 10th anniversary recently. Ms. Teo Kah Hui, she's a member of the Chinese resource panel. Mr. Ganardhipan is a citizen translator who works mainly in Tamil. And thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for being here. Ms. Teo, let's begin with you. These days, it's easy to download an app in order to translate language and so on. Talk to us about the need for translators in an era dominated by, sort of apps like this.
I think the use of technology is not going to replace human translators, because when we look at translation, we look at different grades and the fit for use. For example, you want to use it in a more casual manner. You want to know the subtitles on a video of a language that you don't read, so you use an app to get it machine translated. But you wouldn't do it on something that has, legal and financial consequences, like pharmaceutical products. You would maybe use AI to get it translated, but you cannot remove the human element that goes into fact-checking, that goes into checking the accuracy of the information, because at the end of it, the consequences could be potential human damage, damage the reputation of a company, or financial legal consequences, as I mentioned.
Well, you're talking about language use in a very technical sense, okay?
Yes.
Mr. Dhipan, you work as a senior specialist at the Migrant Workers Centre in Singapore. So you help migrant workers with issues related to employment. So tech issues come into play. And also just how they feel about being so very far away, working at something that for them is really truly fairly foreign. So I take it that your skills will go into not just getting it technically correct, but making sure it is emotionally relevant to them.
That's right. And also sometimes it helps to apply the context of the situation that we're talking about. So rather than giving the most technically accurate translation, it helps to humanize the translation a bit and say things in a way that people will better accept them.
So translation apps, you use them, but with additions.
That's right. So if we use translation apps, we definitely would have to refine the translations that are made. Even things like the SG Translate Together portal, even though it's contextually trained to have a better grasp of the terms that are used in Singapore, we want to make sure that those terms are humanized when we deliver the message to the people that we're talking to. So that is something that you use a human translator for.
Ms. Teo, you specialize in gaming language, we understand.
Yes.
So this is actually, you're taking gaming language to Chinese and then you're translating it back into English.
We have, like for video games, it's usually developed in 4 main languages. English is one of them. China, Korea, Japan being huge gaming markets, they do have games developed in the language. But let's talk in the context of English and Chinese. So for us, when we translate for games, the content often carries culture. When content carries culture, it means there are values. When there's values, there's social norms, there are things that you need to take into consideration. So the challenges for us when we translate, let's say from English to Chinese, and usually it's for this Chinese market in China, you will take into account a lot of conditions such as how do you get the game ratings approved by the Chinese regulatory authorities. And you have to take into account that there will be slangs, puns, humor in games in English. They have to carry across and let a player in China understand what they are trying to say. And similarly for Chinese games, that carries a lot of culture, classical Chinese even, which is very difficult to translate. And there will be a lot of cultural elements that are based on Chinese classics, Journey to the West, the Three Kingdoms, and all this has to be carried over to English, which is culturally very different. And therefore, you have to bring this across. And of course, in the Western market, there are age ratings as well. So when you translate, you have to be very sensitive to the nuances, the cultural, social norms, and how do you
very
get
quickly,
it in the game?
before I return to Mr. Dhipan, when you do that, are you making you have to make a call, as in sometimes, let me say that it's 三国演义 or something else, you translate it, so much is lost or requires so much context, it's just really not worth it. Do you make a call, you know what, we'll drop this metaphor, let's do something different as far as gaming goes?
I think the translation has evolved, but it involves a lot of communications and negotiation with the content creator as well. Like, is this text just for, a background text? Like, it can be removed. Will it affect the gameplay? Will it affect how the gamer will proceed in the game? And can we kind of let it go, or should we still translate it? And what is the best approach?
So it's still driven by best use for yourself, right? So it's not just migrant workers that you're dealing with. You also help with Tamil translations for government communication materials. For you, what's best use in that context?
I think best use would be whatever is simplest and what is easiest to understand with our regional context. I mean, Tamil is spoken widely everywhere, but it's not spoken in the same way. So when we adapt something for use in Singapore, we got to make sure that we most clearly understand it. Yeah.
Right. So, Mr. What about with NTC and the issue of standardized translations in the local context here in Singapore? Is the use of AI and apps is progressing, we know this, but is there a space for that there, for the two to sort of coexist together, the human element as well as the AI?
Yes, there is always when we look at technology, disruptive technology like generative AI and how it affects the translation industry, it is more to augment what the human translator used to do. So there is still need for the human translators, but most of the work, if the content has been translated before, and you do not need to spend time translating from scratch, but rather use the translation memory from what was from before, edit it to be accurate. At the same time, the human translator is doing things that are reviewing, doing quality control, quality checks. They are moving up the value chain instead of just being translating from scratch. So in fact, their skills are being upgraded. They are on the higher value end of it. So yes, there is technology is supposed to augment and complement what the human translators are doing. It's not to replace them.
All right, Mr. Dipan, a final question to you. And I wanted to ask this, but Dawn had a better question. When you said Tamil, correct me if I'm wrong, Tamil is spoken differently, or different users of Tamil speak it differently. When you make an official, say, a government-type communication material, give me a real example of how Tamil is used differently and how you then decide how to translate that, as briefly as you can. Final question.
Right. So maybe I can say this. So for example, if I am translating something and the intended audience of the message is a Singaporean audience, and then it makes sense for me to use this context that I'm speaking to an audience of people who are Singaporean and use words or phrase types that they would be most familiar with. But for example, if I am translating content that is intended for foreign workers, then I would change the way that I present this information to make it a more broader spectrum context rather than just, entirely localized.
So the Tamil that might be spoken in Tamil Nadu in India, as opposed to the Tamil spoken locally.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming into the studios and talking to us about this still very important issue of translation. It's a complex skill and so necessary. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
We've been speaking there to Ms. Teo Kah Hui and Mr. Ganardhipan from the National Translation Committee.